We go on the Fight Bananas podcast. TJ DeSantis, one of the great voices in mixed martial arts, but even better on grammar control on Twitter. My man, how are you?
Oh no. I mean, that's not true. If I am being called out on the carpet for my grammar, generally it means that I was a dick and I was correcting someone and I shouldn't have been because I'm just not nice sometimes. But yeah, no, like I get real heavy with my use of commas, and sometimes I feel like there needs to be a comma, and I tell people that sometimes.
Right. I'm guilty, especially on Twitter and direct messages and Facebooks. When I'm writing a nice article, I'm okay. But usually on Twitter and Instagram, it's bad. And I the worst thing I'm at, TJ, is theirs. The EREs and the
Oh
I.
yeah, no, for sure.
I'm bad at it. It
Yeah.
is what. But,
I mean, I'm willing to let that slide. If you didn't know the proper use of to, I can't let that slide. Like if you're gonna be like, oh, me too, and then you write in like me and then to somebody, like no, that's not good.
No, I'm not. I'm not.
It'd be worse if you were like me too, TWO. That'd be really bad.
Oh, wow. That's horrible stuff. That's horrible stuff. I don't know who you're talking to. Let that fret go.
Generally just my 8-year-old son. That's who. We're working on it.
Okay, for one, how are you doing with all this? This is a life altering. The corona effect. 8-year-old son. I have twin girls and a 3-year-old boy inside. We're going bananas here in the house all day, every day. And
aren't you always going bananas? Honestly,
that is true.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a thing.
Right.
It's really grabbing on hold, but more so than ever. From now on, I'm definitely all the teachers out there. I'm giving them like a $20 tip, weekly tips. They deserve it. They deserve more.
Oh, 100%. Like I feel like we need to actually maybe set up a digital tip jar for our educators in this country. Like the world's getting a rude awakening about what, life can truly be like. Like I've heard a lot of people like, oh, it's great, I'm at home all the time. And it's like, sure, that's great. Unless you're trying to work and also educate your child. And things have been good. My family and I, we've really just struggled with trying to not get cabin fever. And for the first like week and a half of this in Southern California, it's been raining. So it's pretty easy to stay inside and, not get the urge to go outside. But this week it's been really nice weather. Spring has arrived. And I'm pleading with my child, like, please let it go. We can't go to the park. It's not happening.
Right.
Yeah, but.
I just had Hannah Goldie on, and she has like a 3-year-old son, and her son and our son were friends. And we talked about it. Our thing that we look to all day long. We'd go for a walk. We have a nice neighborhood here. People are walking dogs. We stay 6 feet away. And, at around 6 o'clock, we go for a walk. And that's our thing. That gets us out of the house. That gets us to dinner, then to bath time, and then it's to bed. And then we can be adults again.
Right. I mean, that's kind of great. Like, I love the idea that a walk can be something that you look forward to. It's the simple things in life. But at the same time, it's like, it's kind of sad where the highlight of your day can be a walk. Yeah. You know what I mean? For me and my son, we've been playing a lot of like catch in our cul-de-sac. So like I live in Southern California. We don't have yards. We have like spaces that they couldn't build a house between one house and another. So we've been playing in like our cul-de-sac and throwing the football around, and that's been fine. But like, at what point does that become an appetizer to an entree he never gets? You know what I mean? I feel like we're right there. And I don't know. It sounds like this isn't going anywhere anytime soon. So we're going to have to figure something else out because the football and the cul-de-sac is not going to be enough at one point or another. But so far, so good.
Okay. We're about to get into the UFC 249. I got 10 things. There's so much to talk about in a weird state of no MMA. There's so much to talk about. Last question, though. You brought up the son and throwing the football. As a father, and you've called so many fights and you've seen fights. I love listening to your shows. You have so much old school stories. You've seen it all. Would you let your son fight?
Sure. I mean,
Okay.
I would prefer that he doesn't. I would
Okay.
prefer that he doesn't, but I mean, if he wants to, like, who am I to tell my son how to live or not live his life? It's the same thing with football. Like, I don't want him to play football. I just don't want him to get hurt.
Right.
Yeah, I wouldn't want him to play hockey. I wouldn't want him to, I don't know, do anything that puts him in harm's way. But at the same time, it's like, where am I going to, draw the line from keeping him safe to depriving him of a life? Like
Right.
I trained when I was 19 and I didn't have medical insurance. I don't know what I was doing. Stupid stuff.
Right.
But, my parents never told me, hey, don't do that. And I appreciate that. It worked out for me for the most part. And, the best thing that I can say about my experience in training was it earned me friends that I still have to this day and stories that will last a lifetime. And I would hate to deny him of anything like that. I just prefer that he can get those things a little bit more cerebrally and not through pugilism.
Right. And with my son being 3, it's crazy. I have videos, and I sent one to Dean Thomas, our friend, and he was asking me for some shadow boxing stuff, and he loves punching. We have a local gym, Pete White Boxing, MMA. Michael Davis, and called all of his fights and for Island fights, and he loves it. He's has this innate thing to jump into the ring. He is all in with it, and I'm like, man. Kind of what I do, and I talk about it all the time. And of course,
Sure.
it's on TV all the time, and I see him seeing it. There's a little part of me. It's like, man, I really want to teach him tennis or golf
Right.
or baseball. It's like,
Yeah.
do I want to go all in with this? But
You don't get to pick. You don't get to
Right,
pick.
right,
Like, I mean,
right,
he's a human, you know what I mean? So it's
right,
like they'll pick. My son, like, he wants absolutely nothing to do with fighting. Like, it's not that he doesn't like it. He's just not interested. And every once like it's weird. He'll watch Jiu-Jitsu, but he doesn't really care to watch MMA. Which is funny because when he play fights, all he does is just smack the shit out of me. He doesn't try to like choke me or armbar me. It's like, all right, apparently you're a Thai boxer. But like I don't know. He's 8. He hasn't really thought about his future beyond like what he's doing in 10 minutes. So
he fights like Brock Lesnar. There's no
pretty much.
Oh my. All right. So earlier today, last 36 hours, I guess UFC 249 looks like Khabib Nurmagomedov. To me, it's not even a definite. It just seems the rumors are that he cannot make it. Him and Tony, we should have known, is not going to happen. And
Right.
what's next? And then, of course, the rumors was Masvidal and Usman, and that picked up steam. They yelled at each other like we thought would happen to set up the July fight that will happen. What do you just all of that? There's just so much to take in. Then Colby Covington and Woodley. It's like,
Right.
where do we unpack this? Where do we start the layers of this of UFC 249? Should it happen? Should it not happen? You begin, I guess. I don't know where to start.
I feel like I'm at the ice cream bar and you're telling me to dig in and I have no idea where to start because there are so many things to just try to, wrap your head around and try to understand, what is next? What is the best scenario? Like we're split as an MMA community on just that fact. Should there be a fight or shouldn't there be a fight?
How about your take on that right away?
I don't have a take.
Okay.
I really don't. I mean, if the UFC can pull it off and, they're in a environment or a jurisdiction that no one is saying you can't do this, who am I to say that they can't do that? Right. It's a business decision. I'm not a businessman. Like I've got a very small number of people paying me money for my podcast that will tell you straight up, I'm not a businessman. I don't know how to market. I don't know what I'm doing in that sense of things. But if you disagree with the UFC, there's a narrative out there that it's like, oh, well, don't watch. Well, why? I'm a fight fan. Like, just because I don't agree with you doesn't mean that I shouldn't watch it. And I mean, again, this is above my pay grade. I will tell you, though, that if there are fights and UFC 249 goes off without a hitch, take all the pandemic stuff and throw that to the side because for, 3 to 5 hours, there's going to be live sports on TV. And I'm not talking about just MMA. There's going to be live sports on TV. Right. Sign me up. I need it. I need some reprieve from watching Tiger King for the 14th time.
Okay.
You know, like I can only go down the rabbit hole on so many things before like literally enjoying myself becomes redundant and bored, because that's where we're at. Like I'm enjoying life. Don't get me wrong. Like my life hasn't changed too much other than my son is at home and, you know, I don't have to drop him off at school. But for the most part, I still kind of want things to get back to normal, because that's how we progress. That's how we, you know, enjoy things. Like if I don't work at all, then all of a sudden vacation and time to myself becomes the norm. And all I want to do is break away from the norm. I want to go
Yeah.
to work. You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah, if you are able to give me that night of mixed martial arts action, which, you know, I love, everyone probably listening and watching this loves, like, sign me up. I think we need that. Is it the smart and right thing to do? I'll leave that up to everyone else to sort of, you know, pontificate about. But yeah, I think we all could use a good fight night.
100% agree. That's my for the last 4 days. I've been screaming this from the top of a building. It seems like, guys, if the UFC is going to put on the fights, we're going to watch them. Like,
Mm-hmm.
who are
Well, we
we
should.
to say, yeah, like who are we to say no? Like, if we don't know who the CEO of Snickers. I love the Snickers bar. I don't know what the
Right.
guy does on his off time or girl does on his off time. I don't know what they do.
Right.
I don't get the concept of, oh, I feel like it's the not jealousy, or it's the bitterness of mainstream people that are at home and they have to stay at home and they're told to stay at home. And then wait, the UFC is going to put on a show and they're traveling and I feel like it's a little bit of jealousy, I think.
I disagree with that. I
No,
think that people are generally concerned about, you know, their well-being. Like there's a pandemic, like literally a pandemic. Like more people have died in this country than perished in 9/11.
right.
That's a
Right.
crazy stat. People that are concerned and are chastising the UFC probably deep down inside are worried that a loved one over the age of 60 years old that they know is going to perish.
But
And
they're
like
worried about,
go ahead.
they're worried about the fighters?
It doesn't matter. Like it comes down to, we should be on lockdown to those people. We should stop doing anything. And business as usual in any form is not what we're supposed to be doing.
Gotcha.
You know,
Gotcha.
like I said this on Twitter today. Like I've seen a lot of people worried about martial law, and I think that if we're headed towards anything, I think we're actually there now. We're currently living under mixed martial arts law, where we've come up with this lockdown system, and you can violate that law all you want, and all we're going to do is give you warnings. We're not going to deduct a point. We're not going to arrest you. We're not going to take fines. You're supposed to stay home. I, as the governor or the president or whomever, said you need to stay at home, but you violate it. And what am I going to do? Nothing. And that's
Right.
kind of the issue here. Like we're riding both sides of that line. Like I'm not supposed to leave my house, but I also need to make money. And if I go out and try to make money, nothing is really going to happen to me for violating that order. So for me, I feel like we need to make a decision when it comes to the scenario. If people are mad that Dana White and company want to go put on a show, like just be mad at the government as a whole that he's even allowed to do so. Because very
Right.
quickly we could go to the route of India and no one can leave their front doorstep for 3 weeks. And maybe there's an argument that we should do that, but that's not where we're at. And, you know, who am I to say, or who's really anybody to say to a certain extent, look, you shouldn't be doing something that is completely allowed in the confines of law. And I mean, I don't know. People are like, oh, we're in a lockdown. Are we?
Right.
Because I don't get in the car and drive somewhere where I don't need to be right now and worry about it. Like maybe in my heart of hearts, I don't feel good about it, but there's no repercussion outside of my own guilt and conscience doing it. Now, for the record, I've gone nowhere other than essential places. I've come to my studio. I've come to my grocery store. Sadly for me, that's how I've lived my life for 36 years. I only leave the house when it's an essential. But yeah, like I don't know. It's weird. We're living in this, like in California, we have the shelter in place order, and really all that means is people are not working, and when they are going out and violating the order, they can't go to Best Buy and spend money. So it's like we're killing the economy to a certain extent while simultaneously preventing people from making a living. And, the trade-off would be, oh, well, we're fighting this virus and, preventing the spread of it. But we're also not doing that because people are so bored they're walking around the grocery store.
Right. Wow.
I saw 5 high school kids literally walking around the grocery store just killing time. Like, what are you doing?
I know. And it's same story here. Our neighborhood is probably, I don't know, middle class to higher class, I guess. And it's an older neighborhood, I would just, throw out there. And there's one house, and every time we walked around it, day or night, there's 12 trucks, 12 beat up high school trucks. When you would get a truck when you're in high school, and I'm like, this is kind of odd. And every other time we walk with our kids, we see a high schooler walk out. We're like, man, me and my wife, we're looking over, and we're like, man, what are these guys doing? What are these kids doing? Blah, blah. And I'm like, darling, if we were 18 years old and 17 years old, that could have been us as well, walking in and out of that house. We're just at different, time in our lives and, mental capacity in our lives and with kids and all that. And so it's just, it's hard. I really don't think the younger generation, right, the millennials and all that, or the high school, they don't, to me, get the reality of really what's going on. Like you said, I did see your tweet about the 9/11. This is a beyond serious. This is life altering. We will remember the Corona 2020, and this is a year-long thing, I think. This has got, heavy. And I guess the more and more you kind of talked about it and we went down that hole was maybe they shouldn't have a UFC card. Maybe they really shouldn't. Maybe, I think Dana wanted the Khabib and Tony 5 so much. And now if it's not going to happen.
Everybody.
Right. And if that fight is canceled, maybe maybe as a community, it's a sign of, guys, let's just move on. Let's kind of all hunker down. Dana White, Tyron Woodley, everyone else, let's just hunker down and move on to hopefully July.
Right. And I mean, that's the thing. Like, I don't want this to last any longer than anybody else, but I feel like at the same time, if we're not, taking measures to make it so people have to respect these orders, then we are going to be here until the end of the year. And I mean, if that's what I really do worry about. I don't think we're going to have anarchy and chaos in the streets per se, especially if these lockdown orders actually don't really mean anything. But if you take away summer from Americans, people are going to get stir crazy to a point where it's like, all right, maybe we'll have, not uprising per se, but maybe we'll have moments where it's like, okay, we actually do need to bring in some crowd control, because how long are you really going to keep people away from doing things that they have done their entire lives? Like, I cannot imagine a 4th of July where I'm not barbecuing and, may or may not be launching illegal fireworks.
Yeah, I live in Daytona Beach, Florida. The same thing. I'm with you. Every July 4th, they shoot fireworks on the beach, and thousands thousands of people on the beach for 30 miles. I hope we're at a time. I hope June we're getting there, and then hopefully July 4th is the kickoff of America getting back to where we need to. Well, we spent a good chunk of time on that. The one last thing I do want to ask you about the Corona effect is, I'm a listener. I love the podcast Between Rounds Radio. Love it. I love the one that was out today with Woodley and Dean on it. Have you seen a spike in the numbers of the last 8-10 days?
Yeah, and I would love to say that it's because I'm producing awesome content and people can't get enough, but people are bored, man. They're really bored.
It's been outstanding.
Yeah, and I mean that's one thing that I do hope, however long this lasts, that we really appreciate some things. Like, I've spent more time with my kid and my dog and my wife and just, as a family doing things more in the last 2 weeks than I have probably in the last 6 months. And like, that's a wake up call to me. Like, the fact that I'm away from home doing other things so often that I don't get to do a lot of these little things, these simple things in life. Like, well, okay, well, I need to make better choices. You know what I mean? Like, honestly, like, there's no two ways about it. The air here in Southern California is cleaner. It's more breathable. It really is. There's hardly any traffic. Oh, it's crazy. My drive, it's about 35 miles from my house to my studio. Normally it takes me around an hour and a half on any given weekday morning. It takes me 27 minutes right now. Like, it's bonkers. And I think that companies here are going to realize, well, look, maybe we can allow people to work from home more often. Maybe it's not we move your entire job home and we have you telecommute, but I think you're going to find that you have happier employees when they're able to not only be done with work at 5 p.m. on a Friday, but be done with work at 5 p.m. and be home at 5 p.m. Like that's
Right.
that's
Right.
a huge thing. And I think a lot of our like I've noticed. So I'm from the Midwest. I grew up in Minneapolis, and I've noticed there that life is much slower. And moving to Southern California, it was a bit overwhelming how fast life is here and how much you have to hustle in the sense of like literally like hustle and trying to move quickly. Otherwise, your day will get away from you because it just takes that much longer to get places and do things. And I feel like we need to slow down in these bigger, metropolises like Los Angeles and not be so stressed out all the time. And that is one thing that I think that this, lockdown and, shelter in place order has kind of shown people here. It's like, well, look, you don't have to live this life of, chaos and anarchy where there's not enough hours in the day if we all make changes. With that said, probably 2 days after this thing expires and we're back to normal, no one's going to remember that life was simpler and easy, from a logistics standpoint, which is too bad. But yeah, I think there are a lot of lessons that we can take from this. Not only, wash your damn hands, people. Apparently no one washes their hands anymore, touches their face. It's disgusting. But we can also learn, that, hey, maybe we can simplify life and
Right.
spin that forward in a positive way.
Right, definitely. Yeah, just thinking it off the top of my head, it could be, with 4 businesses. The first week, one business goes in, then one business stays at home, and kind of alternate weeks. And so less people are on the road and they just take turns, just something as simple as that. Okay, so back to MMA. One thing, I've even heard you talk about it for years. A lot of people, but we've been on it, just hammering it. Almost every guest. Hey, guys, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? The same thing. Open scoring. MMA scoreboard. We've been throwing that out there. Over 200 guests now talking about it. You, TJ, at UFC Fight Pass and Victor FC, maybe what was it, 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, was at the first card that they had open scoring. How did you think it went? Do you like that input? Would you like a legitimate scoreboard so people can see a score like the NFL, NBA? So what's your take on open scoring?
So I was not there. That was a Phoenix series that Jimmy Smith called, but I watched it from home.
Okay.
Really enjoyed the concept. I was actually kind of worried about the execution of open scoring. I'll be honest with you. Kansas has been the ones that have stepped up with Shannon Knapp, and they worked together to come up with this open scoring format and how they were going to handle it. And I would be lying if I said I wasn't worried about
Sure.
this athletic commission implementing it because, less than a year ago, it took them more than 2 or 3 minutes to add up tens and nines. And they announced the winner of, I believe it was Stephanie Geltmacher and Victoria Leonardo. They they rendered the decision and gave it to the wrong fighter and had to fix it. When you tell me now they need to, add up the scorecards, do so in less than a minute and articulate that information to the corners in a way where the fighters don't see the actual scorecards and where the judges don't see the scorecards, that sounds like a really tall task.
Sure.
And I watched it and I was blown away at their execution. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, I think that there's a lot to learn in how to implement it and how it will affect mixed martial arts bouts moving forward. But what we saw at the beginning of March, I didn't see anything that would suggest that we shouldn't see more of it being used in Kansas. I was worried about basically, one of mixed martial arts major promotions being the guinea pig, with this, because generally when you try something out like this, you do so in amateur fights or, just lower, like not in a world title fight. And I understand that, when you're fighting for Invicta's 135-pound championship, it's not like you're fighting for the UFC's bantamweight title, but still it's a major title that will put you in the UFC. Like
Absolutely.
Invicta has a track record of putting a belt on someone and then them almost not even getting to defend it before they go to the UFC.
Absolutely.
So, those are really big situations to try something out in. And the way that Kansas did it, it was perfect. I like the way that they were able to articulate the information of the scorecards to the corners, and then the corners had the opportunity to make the decision whether or not the athlete that they were, coaching would get that information. And it was good. In the main event, there was a split decision. You knew it was going to be split going into the fifth round. If it would go another 5 minutes, it's just the way that the math worked out. It was the most anticlimactic split decision I had ever seen in mixed martial arts, because you knew exactly the way that it was going. But that said, it was great. It was awesome. And I think it saved the fighters a little bit of a heart attack, if you will, when they heard that it was a split decision. I think that just more reps with it is a good thing. And yeah, and you mentioned the scoreboard. If you're an athlete in any sport, just think about this. Think if you're playing in the Super Bowl and you're watching the clock tick down in the fourth quarter and you don't know if you're winning or not.
100%.
That's bonkers. You should be able to know what you need to do in order to ensure that you win the game. Because at the end of the day, fighting is a game. Yes, it's a fight. Yes, it's a simulation of a no holds barred, conflict between two people, but it's combat sports. Sports are a game. And sometimes, we don't like to let it go to the judges per se, but sometimes you have to fight with the idea that it's going to the judges. And at the end of the day, an athlete's first priority should be to win. It really should be. I know maybe that's not a popular opinion at times, but it doesn't matter. What do you want to do? Do you want to ensure that you're going to continue to make, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars? Or do you want to send, whomever home happy? Well, I want to make sure I put enough food on the table for as long as I can for my family, and give the athletes every tool they need to ensure that they can, maintain that status.
Absolutely. A couple things. You said bonkers 3 times. We have to definitely switch that. You have to, this word bananas. It's catchy. It's good. Throw it in there once in a while. I think that your listeners will like it. 2 is.
I'll gladly do it. Just tell me who I send the invoice to.
The Dean Tool.
Dean Tool?
2 is, the Falcons Patriots Super Bowl. I don't know how much of a football fan you are. It was just one of the greatest comebacks ever. Tom Brady 3-4 years ago. You just kept on seeing the score, and you kept on seeing, wait, if they do this and this, and they scored 8 points, and they just keep coming back. The suspense kept on building. How it would just be insane that we didn't know Demetrius Johnson, Henry Cejudo, who was winning in what round.
Right.
We did. It was just it's mind-blowing.
And it makes those fights better. You talk about the comeback with the Patriots. If you don't have the scoreboard, you don't totally know that a monumental comeback is happening. You may have a good idea. I remember Ioana and Jacek's title fight with, I believe it was Karolina Kowalkiewicz, where Ioana, I thought, had dropped the first 2 rounds, and then she won rounds 3, 4, and 5 flawlessly, won and took home the decision. And that's what champions are made of.
Right.
It would have been even better if after 10 minutes, the commentators can go, look, if Ioana drops one more round, her title on paper is gone. The narrative of a fight that can be told because of that information, it's just magnified.
So last question on that, UFC 300, wherever wherever it is going to be, and whenever it is going to be, will there be an MMA scoreboard for UFC 300 or the open scoring?
It's a great question. I don't think that has a lot to do with just the UFC. If the UFC goes to Kansas tomorrow, where, the athletic commission is willing to say, hey, look, we offer open scoring, they're going to say no. The reason they're going to say no is because it is an anomaly that a commission offers that option. I understand that we have differences, great differences in the quote unquote unified rules. But that said, the unified rules of mixed martial arts do not offer an open scoring system. To say that Kansas is, promoting fights underneath the unified rules while they're using open scoring, that's just not true. That's not a unified rule thing. And that's too big of a difference from, the downed opponent with the one hand and and whatnot to say, oh, we're still in the unified rules. No, that is not the unified rules. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, the fact that we're talking about unified rules being decisively divided is kind of like a very telling thing at its core. But I think that if the ABC were to look at open scoring, and they'll have a good amount of data, hopefully, when they revisit it with Kansas, then maybe they make that decision to not only, just make it mandated across the board. This is how we score mixed martial arts moving forward, but to allow the promoter to make, that decision. I like that. And the thing about the UFC is the UFC is not going to go to a market where they use something that changes the fight so drastically, with open scoring, and then be forced to not be able to do it again. The UFC is going to adopt a rule change that, is something that they can do every show, so it adds continuity. You can't have a title fight, fought under open scoring, in my opinion, for the world's, biggest mixed martial arts promotion. You can't win with open scoring and then go to defend without. Like, that's not,
right.
That's 100%. Not, yeah, like you're changing the sport fundamentally for one night only, which is not what the UFC does.
Right. They're too big and too much going on. So over the years, one question I love is, only you have this answer. You've called so many fights. One of my good friends, Jacob Kilburn, and I probably watched it over 200 times. UFC Fight Pass on Instagram replayed it when he had the knockout. And I remember all these comments were about your gut reaction of what Jacob just did and the knockout. And I think the killer kills, you nailed it. It was tremendous work. It was one of those Joe Buck on, winning the World Series. It was just fabulous. What was one of the calls that you had afterwards? Even you looked at Dean Thomas or one of your other partners and you're like, wow, I nailed it. I liked what I did there. Oh, no, nothing.
I don't worry about that. Like, so,
no?
My mixed martial arts, especially commentators, it's full of gimmicks. It is all over just like that. It's like, it's not just like that. You said that a bunch of times, and like it happened in the 4th minute of the 3rd round. Not just like that. Long build to that moment. My belief is, I have a catchphrase, if you will, but it's so mundane and normal and ordinary that you probably don't even know it exists. Most people don't know it's a thing. When there's a stoppage and it's a good stoppage, I say it is done. It is done. And there's many variations of that to where it's like, oh, it is done, or it's done. So it's like,
right.
I'm not here to be a part of the show. I'm here to just help, tell a story. And hopefully I say something in an enthusiastic way where it looks good when someone like Fight Pass grabs, that audio and shows the recap. I'm just a fight fan and a broadcaster. And I've, been able to find a nice little spot in this world for me to pay my bills doing things, two of the biggest, passions of my life in one. And that's, calling mixed martial arts fights. And my goal, I believe personally, my job is similar to a baseball umpire. If I do my job really well, you don't remember me. Like if I do my job poorly, you're going to remember me. And I don't sit in my room and come up with ideas on what to say, how to say it, because that is rehearsed. And anytime you rehearse something, it's the same thing. Like when I write a radio spot, I don't write a script. I'll do bullet points. When I do my stand-ups for a show, it's bullet points. I don't want to say the same thing over and over again because it can become redundant. And, I'm kind of, contradicting myself when I say when there's a good stoppage, I say it is done. But that's mainly to not get lost in my own words and try to get cute and fancy and say something that's ridiculous. So there are calls that I enjoy when I go back and hear them, but it's like not something that I ever be like, yeah, who said that? This guy. No.
Well, not that I don't want to say you're lowballing yourself or underrating. I think it's really vital what you do and what commentators do for mixed martial artists and for watching it. You guys are putting the lyrics on the screen. The fighters.
Let me, if you'll bear with me, I have I'm very passionate about broadcasting. It is like I've done it since I was a child, literally. I believe that a play-by-play commentator's job is like the bus driver of a sightseeing tour. And the tour guide, my color commentator, is really the flavor. And by that, I mean, you're not going to go on a sightseeing tour if you don't have a bus driver. Your
Correct.
sightseeing tour is going to be garbage if the bus driver is terrible and kills everyone in a horrible fiery car crash. And the color commentator or the tour guide cannot be put in a position to give you the best information or entertaining information without being, in front of the Hollywood sign to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, it's the Hollywood sign. It originally said Hollywoodland, and in 19 whatever they took that part down. So I feel like, yeah, I'm pivotal, 100%. But my goal is to make the color commentator shine. It's his tour. It's his information that's going to give you, memories that can last a lifetime. It's my job to get him to those positions. And then when Jacob Kilburn knocks someone out, to scream loud and do so in a non-annoying way, so UFC Fight Pass can make a pretty kick-ass highlight reel of it.
There you go. There you go. With all the fights you've seen, is there one or two or three that really jump at you? If a knockout, a war, or something really technical, or just the moment, sometimes, I don't know about you, sometimes, I don't get attached, but, you start following the fighters and you see their ups and downs, you see what they go through and how much this fight means to them to get to where they want to go, usually the UFC or Bellator of that nature. Has there been a couple fights that really, still to this day, where you were, what you ate that night, and it's just it's in your brain forever, just forever.
Yeah, as far as like fights that I've called,
Yeah.
I'll never forget the Invicta FC flyweight title fight between Vanessa Porto and Jennifer Maia. It was a rematch. It was similar to that Joanna Jędrzejczyk match that I told you about a moment ago. Vanessa Porto, in my opinion, won the first 2 rounds fairly handedly. And then the next 3 rounds, Jennifer Maia came back and won. And the emotion that came out of her when she got her hand raised was bonkers. I mean, that's what this sport is absolutely all about. And there's something very, like I said, I don't feel like a big part of the show, but I feel attached to these fighters and athletes by being a very small part in telling their story. And to meet them and know them and learn, not just what are they fighting for? Like, they want to be a world champion. They want to go to the UFC. They want to, be the biggest star and make the most money. But why? And I think with the women's side of things, like, we're still in a time and an era where not too many women told their parents, look, I want to be a cage fighter. And their parents were like, great, awesome. So it's like, okay, so what originally drew you to that? What sort of hurdles did you have, just in your home life, telling, like, a lot of these women, we're starting to see more and more, but like, they wrestled in high school. What was that like? Did your school even offer a women's, wrestling program or, a spot on the team? Or were you forced to wrestle, boys from all over the state? Were you, able to fit in and, not many, young girls or martial artists at all, let alone, trying to push their way into a cage when they're of legal age to compete. Like, it's that right there is a crazy story. And every single athlete on an Invicta card starts there. And that's pretty amazing. Another fight that really sticks out to me is one of my personal favorites. I mean, we can argue semantics all day. Maybe you won't even call it a fight. It was the jiu-jitsu match. It was the finale of the Eddie Bravo Invitational 10 in Mexico City. It went down between Eddie Cummins and Gio Martinez. And Eddie Cummins, from the famed and feared Danaher Death Squad, took on Gio Martinez. And, Martinez has a, Mexican heritage, and the fans in Mexico City that night. We were in a velodrome, which I didn't know what a velodrome was before that night.
I don't.
So it's a bicycle track with like big banked curves and corners. Like, so it's like a NASCAR track essentially. It's an Olympic event. So you get on like one of those, crazy 10 speeds and, try not to fall when you're in the corners. So we're in the middle of this velodrome that has
that, but they don't have mixed martial arts. It's just crazy.
Well, Well, we could talk about that all day. I don't know if mixed martial arts would work in the Olympics, but the velodrome was like this really crazy, like sci-fi looking building that had a dome, and it was very loud. The acoustics in there were crazy. It's probably the loudest building I've ever been in, and I want to remind you they weren't hitting each other. It's
Right.
jujitsu, so it was pretty cool. And Gio Martinez tapped out Eddie Cummings in overtime. It was a very emotional night for him. He retained his title. No one could stop the Danaher guys. He did it. Eddie Bravo was there, his coach and namesake of the tournament. And it was just one of the most magical things ever. Like, I love tournaments in combat sports. We don't really get them often. Invicta kind of brought that format back last year, but it's like in modern day mixed martial arts, it's very hard to have a tournament and not have these, athletes destroy one another. In jiu-jitsu, like a 16-man tournament, like it really doesn't get much better than that. And if you're a fan of jiu-jitsu, like you'll fall in love with it. And that was pretty amazing.
Wow, both really good. You were there at Quintet Ultra in Vegas 6 months ago and over the July. To me, you just bring it up, to all these super fights and events. I can see a league. I can see the UFC, Zuffa. I can really see them putting a lot of money in behind it and really creating a league that Anthony Lionheart Smith. It seems like all these fighters, all the time, they want to fight. They put their name in the ring, but T. Woodley fights once a year. Maz fights 2 times a year. Lionheart fights once or twice. And maybe, they can keep their name out there, keep the juices going and create, drama. And just not even that, they make, 8, 10, 12, whatever it is, and just kind of keep things flowing. I can see the UFC getting behind it and really creating a league, teams, or a lot of single tournaments, just in nature. What do you think about that idea?
So Dana White has that old analogy, like if you're at a football game and a fight breaks out, what are you going to watch? You going to watch a football game or are you going to watch the fight?
Always.
Well, First off, I'll say if I'm at a fight and a hockey game breaks out, I'm definitely watching that hockey game because that'll be bonkers. Like, what the hell's going on? But, jiu-jitsu is a fight. It is. And I think with the right format, you're going to get people to realize that it's a fight. It still, makes me feel the way that I want to feel on any given fight night where, people are bashing each other's faces in. With that in mind, it really comes down to the format. I think a lot of people, especially mixed martial arts fans that have watched the sport for a very long time, even if they don't know it, they like jiu-jitsu. It doesn't take too many really beautiful submissions to make you appreciate that art. And I love the quintet format. I love the one-off super fights. I don't think it's very hard to showcase the talents of, say, like a Danielle Kelly, by putting her in with Cynthia Calvillo, who has a much bigger name. But, on that night, it was very apparent who was in whose world. And when you see someone like Danielle Kelly, submit an active UFC fighter in seconds, it's like, oh, damn. And then, you go on to see Alexei Olenek, this feared UFC heavyweight, tap quicker than they can even say his name to Gordon Ryan. Is like, okay, there's something here. Even if you're not, fully on board, there's something there. And, the production value that went into that show, the crowd that was in attendance that night, like all the makings are right there. The ingredients for a successful promotion and league, as you put it, like, I don't want to say that the brain trust that put that together aren't working hard, but you don't have to work too hard if you have the right ingredients and formula. And I think they have it. It just comes down to, first off, I guess we need to get past the pandemic. But after that, I think that we can make jiu-jitsu pretty friggin' amazing. And, Eddie Bravo launched the Eddie Bravo Invitational with one goal in mind, and that was to change the way that people view jiu-jitsu. And specifically when jiu-jitsu, was brought up as a potential television sport. We're there. Mission accomplished for Eddie. It's not going to be as popular as mixed martial arts. Like, I'm not delusional in that sense. But I do believe that with the right promoting, the right personalities, and as long as those athletes can go out there and deliver, people tuning in for a 2-hour or 3-hour grappling event, at the highest level is not out of the realm of possibility. They're probably not going to spend, $65 for a grappling pay-per-view, but if it's an addition to your UFC Fight Pass subscription, or you got the right names and you want to charge 20-30 bucks for a pay-per-view, take my money.
Or not even that, even on Fox Sports 1 or ESPN now, ESPN 2, they all these networks are fiending for, live action, live sports.
Cornhole is on TV. Cornhole.
There you go. You can't make that up. You know what I mean? I set you up there. That's me being the bus driver, I guess.
There you go.
One last question, and then definitely want you to plug Between Rounds Radio. I love consistent content. I'm a content guy. That's what we probably put out too much content with Fight Bananas. We actually we kind of subletted 2 brand new podcasts underneath umbrella. One's a professional wrestling podcast. One's a bare knuckle FC one. We're just, we love creating content. I love what you do. You're always creating content. Every morning I wake up, I kind of refresh my podcast app, and I'm hoping to hear, hopefully you, but at least someone with the Between Rounds Radio. So I really love what you're doing. So definitely push that at the end. But my last question is this. I think, and we were talking about it a little bit earlier, I really love the commentary teams. To me, it's really, really vital. Anything DC and Dominic Cruz and John Anik. Lately, it's been Paul Felder. I'm loving what Paul Felder's doing. Megan Anderson for Invecta FC. Name me, throw out a couple names if you have to think about it. Throw out a couple names. Someone like a Dean Thomas who was in the game, or a coach, or someone on the rise, or someone maybe at the end of their career who you think who can step into a Paul Felder role, or a Megan Anderson, because they've been nailing them. Dominic Cruz is, to me, one of the best in the business. And like I said, I thought they couldn't do better. And now I'm hearing Paul Felder. I'm like, wow. And I love Paul Felder, the fighter, but Paul Felder, the commentator, might be even better. Maybe a fighter, a coach, male, female, that you think that could, get the spot.
So I will say that I'm biased a little bit, and, adore the people that I work with on a regular basis. I think Dean Thomas is fantastic. Despite, letting people have the microphone and then cutting promos in the ring that puts them on SportsCenter in a negative light. Don't do that. But I think Dean's pretty great. My thing is like, as much as you love Paul Felder, I enjoy Paul to no end. I like Daniel Cormier. I like Dominic Cruz. I would kick all of them out of the booth right now in a heartbeat, because I don't like active fighters calling fights in the promotion that they fight in. For me, analysts should be people that are done fighting, have no vested interest whatsoever in the fights that they're calling. It's hard to not have some sort of bias come through when you're calling a fight in your division, or even worse, you're calling a fight that involves one of your teammates. Daniel Cormier recently called a fight of Deron Wynn, and Deron Wynn is this guy. They coach wrestling together.
Yep.
And I actually think that Daniel Cormier was actually too hard on him, which Cormier is going to tend to be harder on people that he has a relationship with than sugarcoat things. That's just, wrestlers don't,
Good. Great point.
I mean, they're going to be harder on their friends than more lenient. I remember this was much more apparent in Strikeforce days, where Frank Shamrock would just straight up talk smack about dudes in his division when he was commentating. Sure, it makes for fun, salacious nonsense. And, this is, fight sports. After all, it's one part spectacle, one part sport. Well, maybe 3 parts spectacle, 1 part sport. At least that's how you get paid. But with that said, I want my analysts, bias free. And I think that the great part about, analysts being mixed martial artists is it allows people an avenue to stay involved in the sport at the highest level when they can't fight anymore, when they shouldn't be fighting anymore. And I think that you take away those opportunities when you allow active fighters to be in that role. I don't make those decisions for the UFC. So they'll continue doing what they want to do. But I do believe that, every person that you mentioned has really found, their second sort of calling when it comes to mixed martial arts. And the fact that they're, able to, give opportunities to those people is fantastic. I do, though, get bummed that we don't see Kenny Florian in the booth anymore. I think Kenny's a great analyst. But, for whatever reason, there's no room for Kenny. I think Julie Kedzie is a very important person in mixed martial arts and women's mixed martial arts. I mean, she's, a pioneer and a trailblazer. She's going to kill me that I called her a pioneer. She does not like being called a pioneer. But she has a significant, spot in the upbringing of women's mixed martial arts in this country. She's not competing anymore. I don't think that means that we shouldn't see her, at the highest level in mixed martial arts, breaking it down in one form or another. So, I just think that you should do everything you can to foster former athletes to getting to that role and continuing their career that way. I'm very passionate, as you can tell, about broadcasting. I think that when you're fighting at the highest level, and this doesn't, like, we talk a lot about fighters and fighters' pay. Like, it's kind of shocking when you hear that someone at the highest level in mixed martial arts is pulling down a day job. To me, broadcasting for the UFC, that is a full-time job. Even if you're only doing it once or twice a month, like, you should be doing everything you can to get better. And honestly, when you're doing it at the higher level like that, really hard to get reps. You know what I mean? Like, you can only, like, how often does Michael Bisping get to do it? Not all that often, once a month, twice a month, maybe if he's incredibly lucky. So he should be out there doing what he needs to do, necessary to become the best, commentator he can be. How do you do that when you're not only fighting in the UFC, but you're a champion like Daniel Cormier?
Absolutely.
Like during his reigns. So I just, again, maybe I'm in the minority here, but I just think that you shouldn't have more than one job other than trying to climb the ladder of being the best in your division in the world. And we shouldn't ask you to take away from that by pulling down commentary dates or working at a firehouse.
Right. Wow. TJ DeSantis, thank you so much for your time. It's been awesome. A really fun conversation. Very stay safe with you and all your loved ones. But yes, spot away. Definitely everyone that's listening to our podcast, hopefully they will, listen to yours if they haven't already, and they probably have had. But definitely plug away. Where can they get your content? Where can they pay for it with Patreon and all of that?
So a long time ago, I decided that while I was working in an FM radio station that I should do a mixed martial arts podcast. And I say podcast, it wasn't called a podcast then. Didn't know what that word was. No one knew what that word was. I was the third ever MMA radio show behind Eddie Goldman and Ryan Bennett. And that turned into kicking off what I think is the sort of flag bearer for what modern MMA podcasts look like today. And that's the Sure Dog Radio Network. I don't know how many shows we did at Sure Dog. I know there was over 1,500 of my show called Beatdown. At least another 500 or 600 Savage Dog shows, another 500 or 600 Jordan Breen shows, plenty of roundtables and Beatdown After the Bells, and a lot of things that we did there. And I no longer technically work for Sure Dog. I still provide some content for Sure Dog. But we kind of carry on the next evolution of the Sure Dog Radio Network under the banner Between Rounds Radio. Unfortunately, the podcast space has changed in a positive way in the sense that anybody can do this. They can go out there and, go try to be a broadcaster. And that's awesome. And, podcasts come in many different flavors. The thing about flavors for the most part is as long as it's edible, it's not a mistake. And what you like may not be what I like. But the problem with that as a whole is we're going to a buffet, and it's really hard to find what is really good. You got to kind of be told what is good. And at this point, we're in a time where if you want to be a full-time podcast host or producer, depending on what you're covering, it's incredibly hard to do only that and pay your bills. I had a full-time job at Sure Dog for 12 years. It was amazing. I loved every second of it. However, that went away. And that's why I have to produce a lot of stuff behind a paywall. And I feel like I'm a professional broadcaster. This is all I do in one form or another. So I do, unfortunately, have to ask people to pay a little bit of money each month to support our shows. But I think we're doing pretty great things. I did the first ever post-fight show, period, in mixed martial arts. Television, radio, anything. Like, it was Beatdown After the Bell, UFC 71. I actually just replayed that on Between Rounds last week, which was bonkers. Broadcasting in my parents' garage. Silly. But
awesome.
That's where we were at in 2007. We still do all of that. We do live radio, take listener calls. We don't do a lot of interviews. But I feel like we have a lot of interesting perspective, and I try to bring in people like Dean Thomas and do shows. We do a show with Dean called MMA Math. It's a 3 to 5 minute podcast where he just breaks down the main event and tells you the path to victory for both athletes. When you pay me, I in turn pay Dean. Every single dollar that we get through Patreon, patreon.com/between rounds, goes back into the product itself. It's very difficult to try to get people, because I'm the only one who doesn't have a job. So everyone else that helps me, they're doing a real job in the daytime while I wait for them and play video games. So, I'm trying to make it worth their time to, sit down and talk fights with me rather than, eat dinner with their family on that night. And they deserve to be compensated for that. But I think there's, things that are there for everyone. I mentioned, there are a lot of different flavors of podcasts. Honestly, right now, I mean, granted, we're in a pandemic and there are no live fights, but a lot of our content, pretty much 100% of everything right now on Between Rounds is retrospective nostalgia type content, which is really sort of our specialty. The people that I have on staff are much more qualified to tell you about things like UFC 71 because they experienced it rather than who's going to win the upcoming preliminary card on any, given fight night. We are bringing in people to, do that and, that are betting sharps and do things like that. I think that there's a lot of room for growth on that side of things. But the thing that I think is really great about Between Rounds, like we have a show called MMA Stories. It's hosted by Monty Cox, one of mixed martial arts most, foremost managers in the history. Like Monty repped almost every guy that went through the military fighting systems, and at one time had 4 out of the 5 UFC champions under contract as a manager. Not a lot of people remember Monty's name. Monty has stories for days, which is why we call his show MMA Stories. He's flanked by Jeremy Horn, who is a mixed martial arts Hall of Famer. He probably won't end up in the UFC's Hall of Fame, but like the guy has over 200 fights. He has literally like plastic crates full of title belts from all over the world. The guy's a legend and has crazy stories. It's a fun podcast. I'm going on and on. Sorry, I'm passionate about what we do in the podcast space. But yeah, if people can check it out, we're available everywhere for free. Just do a search for Between Rounds Radio, iTunes, Spotify, Google, wherever, iHeartRadio. And then we do provide some ad-free content. And then like all of our shows are ad-free behind the paywall. And then we do have some Patreon exclusives. We've been doing watch-alongs, which like somebody trying to tell me that if you watch a fight and discuss like what it is while it's happening, that's called a fight companion. And that's not called a fight companion. Joe Rogan's podcast that does that is called a fight companion. Like I can't do a show that's a sitcom and be like, no, that's called Friends. No, Friends is called Friends. That's called a sitcom.
Right.
So we do these watch along things. I call it, so my post-fight show is called Beatdown After the Bell. My normal show is Beatdown. Get the play on words, Beatdown After the Bell. It's the best late stoppage in MMA. We have taken that formula and done, shows from many years ago. We call it Way After the Bell.
Right. People love those shows. Those are
fun.
Professional wrestling has one. I don't know if you're a wrestling fan or not, but like something to wrestle with, that's what they do. It seems like, people that have missed those shows or they loved UFC 44, just saying they're like, that was one of my favorite events. I remember, with my buddies watching the show, and then it pops up on their, podcast thread. It's like, wow, this is one of my favorite shows. I want to listen to it again. It just brings back good memories for them. Sure. I think that's a really, it's a great spot niche for a podcast, and I love it.
Yeah, I actually produce a podcast called the Laps Fan Wrestling Podcast, which is one a variety of outlets podcast of the year in the wrestling space, and the average show is anywhere from like 6 to 8 hours long. Like there is no more in-depth podcast about professional wrestling than the Laps Fan. It just doesn't exist. They did a look back at the 10-year anniversary of Chris Benoit's death. And I think the podcast was 15 hours, and like it was hard to get through. Like they get you to a level that like Dark Side of the Ring, this Vice series just did a 2-part special on Chris Benoit, and they left a lot of stuff on the cutting room floor because you have 2 45-minute episodes. We had 15 hours, and if we wanted 16, we could have done that, or if we wanted 60, we could have done that. And it's by 2 incredible personalities. One is Jack Encarnacio, who's a former journalist He worked for the Boston Herald. Like, he's a legitimate journalist. Covering mixed martial or covering professional wrestling that way is not something that a lot of people have done. He's flanked by his co-host JP Sorrow, who's a Broadway actor, voice talent, incredibly skilled when it comes to impersonations. And what they have done is just absolutely bonkers. Without that show, I probably wouldn't be calling fights today, because it makes me enough money to where I can supplement my income, or lack thereof, being a play-by-play guy, with, this podcast space. And the Laps Fan is just crushing everything that I do, everything else that I do. And like, the problem is, like, I'm between rounds, I'll do anywhere from like 7 to 10 episodes a week, and it can't make the same amount of money as the Laps Fan does doing one episode a week. Granted, that one episode might be 16 hours,
Yeah.
but still, just
Yeah.
one episode. I don't know. It's really amazing what the podcast space is doing. And I don't know, I'm very fortunate enough to work with really great people. And I think that we live in a time now where a lot of the traditional jobs in the world, not even just media, but just traditional jobs in the world, are being minimized. And it's very hard to make money the way that our grandparents made money. And that's definitely true in the podcast space. But like, I've heard a lot of people complain, like, oh, I got to pay money for a podcast. Podcasts are free. I've worked in podcasting exclusively. I left FM radio in 2005. I have never produced a podcast where I didn't get paid for it. Never did. Granted, the listener didn't have to pay for it for 12 years, but someone was paying me. Now, those companies that used to pay me can't pay me. So I'm asking the listener, can I have $3 a month? Like, if you can't afford $3 a month for my content, then my content's not good enough. And if my content's not good enough, that's fine. But to say that, oh, podcasts are free. No, podcasts are not free. At least quality podcasts are not free, because to do podcasts at the highest level, I think that you need to really devote time, energy, and effort. And while, amateur podcasts, are probably predominantly, the ones that outnumber professional podcasts, that drive and excitement as a host when you're not getting paid, that can take you a long way until it can't. And there's nothing worse than trying to do something, especially in the art side of things, because I believe this is an art. First and foremost, it's entertainment, which is art. If you're going through the motions and doing something that you don't necessarily want to do, it is going to ring true very apparently.
Oh yeah.
And it sounds like you're a married guy, right, David?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right.
Married.
Right. If you were walking out to go do this podcast and your wife was yelling at you that it's not worth your time or effort to do so, and it was being a burden on your life, you're going to have to make a decision at that point. Does this fulfill me in a way that getting that lecture is worth it? Or does it give me something financially to where I can come back and go, look, this is definitely worth my time. I left the house and I had this much money, and I'm coming back with this much money. That's just the economics of a job. And
right.
I mean, it's taken me a long time to realize this, but time is money. It truly is. Like, I don't think it's something you should become obsessed with per se, but when you're not, like, you have to pay me for my time. And sometimes I have to pay myself for my time, because no one wants to pay me anymore, because the business has changed as a whole. That expense needs to be passed down to somebody. And again, it's like I said a moment ago, if you can't afford $3, $5, or $10 for my podcast, it means that I'm not fulfilling your needs. And if that's the case, that's on me. But a lot of people, I'm happy to say, find the content that we provide to be worth something. And that's all I'm asking. It's essentially going to be expired. Maybe I will, carry it on a little bit. This pandemic's not going away anytime soon. But when we all got locked down, I said, hey, look, our tiers on between rounds are $5, $7.50, or $10. And basically your accessibility to things is weighted on how much you're donating and what your tier is. I said, if you just donate $1, you'll get access to all of our content through the end of March. Maybe I'll extend that a couple weeks into April, just so, like, people, like, I'm serious. Like, I can't imagine people that are stuck at home to where they can't go anywhere, that they can't, I mean, even if they have money, they can't go out and spend it on anything. Like, you can only watch things on Netflix for so long before you want to throw your, phone through the friggin' television.
Like you see with the buffet, you just need something else. You can't eat just meat. You do have to hit that salad bar just a little bit. And even watching Netflix, I did the Tiger King, and I've watched Ozark season 3. But I go back to it. I'm like, okay, I listen to Between Rounds. I got to listen to podcasts. I listen to a wrestling podcast. I'm like, I need a little bit of different flavors. I know a lot of kids don't know about this. Reading's actually really great too. So I donate 30, 45 minutes and I read a little bit. And then of course, with the kids at home, other than nap time, it's this more than it's a 24/7 job. It's you're all in dinners, lunches, and baths. And so it's life comes at you fast, but wow.
Thankfully, being a parent can be done with one earbud in, so you can kind of do both at the same time. But I appreciate the time, David. Thank you. It's a crazy time. Like we'll never forget this time in our lives. Like it's the oddest time since 9/11 for me. And you mentioned my tweet. Like we passed the death count. The death toll is higher for COVID-19 in this country than 9/11. And unfortunately, you can't go back from that. It's not going to be something where, oh, hey, 1,000 people didn't actually die. That number's not going to get better. We're not going to feel better. It's going to go up. And I think during this time, we need to focus on the simple things, spending time with our family. We have a lot more time, freed up as far as, not going out and going and doing things. Make your time at home count, with your loved ones. And when they're sick of you, find a podcast.
There you go. TJ DeSantis, thank you so much for your time. We really do appreciate it. We'd love to have you again anytime you want. And we'll see you soon. Hopefully sooner or later, one of these towns, one of these island fights, UFC Fight Pass dates, and we'll talk then.
David, I appreciate it. And I forgive you about your improper or lack of commas.
I got to get better with the commas. I need to work on the commas. All right, TJ, have a great night, buddy. Appreciate it.
Thanks, David.